You can feel the invisible wall between you and your avoidant man. He's there, but he's not really there. You ask him what's wrong and he shrugs and says, nothing. You try to have a deep conversation and he shuts down. You tell him how much he means to you and he changes the subject. No matter what you do, he won't open up. You start wondering, did I do something wrong? Does he even love me? Why doesn't he care? But it's not about you. There's a reason he won't let himself be vulnerable with anyone. And unless you understand exactly how his mind works, you'll spend your entire relationship feeling like you're chasing something that feels just out of reach. I'm Adam Lane Smith, the attachment specialist. I've been working in the field of psychology and relationships for over 16 years now, and I have worked with thousands of avoidant men and their partners in relationships. If you're in a relationship with an avoidant man right now, you might be feeling increasing frustration and probably exhaustion, trying to move your relationship into deeper emotional territory, as he seems to fight with all he has to keep you out. But if you want to get an avoidant man to share his true feelings, you just need to approach it differently. Because when an avoidant man feels pressure to be vulnerable, his nervous system sends one clear signal: danger. Run. This isn't about him not caring. It's about him not knowing how to process emotions in a way that doesn't feel like a threat. And if you keep pushing the wrong way, he will shut down completely, and you may lose him for good. But there is a way to break through. And today I'm going to tell you exactly how to get an avoidant man to share his true feelings without triggering him, without chasing, and without losing yourself in the process. Because he does have feelings. In fact, he feels deeply. And when you understand him, and you can understand and effectively communicate with him, that's when he'll let you in. So let's dive in and explore what's happening inside your avoidant man's brain. Now, if you've ever tried to get an avoidant man to open up, you've probably felt like you're hitting a brick wall. No matter how much love or patience you offer, the fortress stands firm. And it's frustrating because to you, emotional intimacy feels good. It brings comfort. But to him, emotions trigger his sympathetic nervous system. An avoidant man isn't choosing to shut down. His nervous system is wired to do it. His brain perceives emotions the same way it perceives physical danger. It's not because he doesn't care. It's because his biology doesn't let him process emotions the way that you do. So what's actually happening inside his brain? Well, every time you try to connect emotionally, his amygdala, the brain's fear center, activates a fight or flight response. This isn't a mental connection. It's a full body stress response. Cortisol, the stress hormone, floods his system. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, is blocked. His nervous system enters survival mode. Instead of feeling good, he feels trapped, stressed, maybe even panicked. And when his nervous system is overloaded like this, he only has one instinct: shut down, withdraw, escape, now. And that's why he avoids deep conversations, because they trigger stress. It's why he shuts down during conflict, because his brain is wired to avoid threats. It's why he acts emotionally detached, because his system won't let him feel safe in connection. So to get your avoidant man to open up, you work extra hard to create a safe environment and maybe even communicate using the words safe and safety. And this is a critical mistake because the word safety doesn't resonate with avoidant men the same way it does with women. Women instinctively seek safety in relationships. It's a biological survival mechanism. Avoidant men want peace. And those two very different things, when you think about them, actually come from the same root. But they're going to be described and experienced a little bit differently. It's important for you to remember that our brains and nervous systems were not built for modern day, where when you're sad, you go to therapy, you work a job and make money, and then you use that money to go to the grocery store and everything is safe and contained. That's not what our systems are built from. Our systems are built from hunter-gatherer survival states. The old times where people had to go out and hunt for their food in order to feed the family. Men in particular would go out and hunt and engage in existentially dangerous activities every single day to try to help the tribe survive. The biological mechanisms here are important to remember. Men are not geared to seek endless safety, or the tribe will starve and die. Women are going to be at home, safe and sheltered primarily, so safety is absolutely crucial. In fact, a woman's fertility decreases during times of less safety on purpose so she won't get pregnant and have a child in an unsafe area or situation. However, men are wired to seek peace. Go out, face challenge and difficulty, come back, immerse in peace. It's not safety that men are looking for, but the same environment can foster safety and peace. In fact, one could say they're opposite sides of the same coin. Men are designed to go out and fight tigers, mammoths, animals, etc., and then come home with those resources to feed their family and immerse. They will then feel arguably safe socially, emotionally, and connectively, but that's not, again, going to resonate as a sense of safety. It feels strange for most men to try to say, I want to feel safe. Well, that doesn't make sense. I'm not going to feel safe anywhere where I'm chasing my ambition, growing, expanding. And it's not that women can't face unsafety. Plenty of women go out and face dangerous circumstances or heavy challenges, but women are not primed to continuously exist within that, especially if they are also trying to bear children or maintain a family. Safety is best for family. Peace is best for hunters who come back. This is what our brains are built for. Now, again, that's the hunter-gatherer structure we have come from. That's evolutionary psychology. This, actually, though, is how an avoidant man's brain feels all the time. When there's no threats present, his brain is still detecting threats. His system is designed for detecting those painful threats out there. There's a tiger coming to eat me. He can't distinguish between emotional disconnection or emotional overwhelm, which feels dangerous, and an actual tiger coming to eat him, right? His childhood experiences and past relationships have shaped his worldview when the people in his childhood overwhelmed him with emotional needs, arbitrary demands, made things unsafe or unstable for him, and he was forced to rely on himself to generate his own safety and stability. Now, emotional closeness feels like letting somebody in and they're going to threaten his stability. So closeness is danger to him. Closeness is the tiger coming to eat him. His system responds with the same level of threat. And now the view has shaped his worldview as he keeps getting into the same types of relationships and accruing the same sets of data over and over and over. It keeps his nervous system in a heightened state of arousal, which leads, unfortunately, into the reality that avoidant men can't talk about feeling safe. They've never felt safe. What they want is this mythological perfect state someday called peace. They want a state where their central nervous system is truly at rest, where they're actually co-regulating peacefully with other people they trust. This is an important piece for social mammals. We die without this. We actually die early without this. Cancer, heart attack, stroke, all of that sets in. This is the crucial piece here. In a relationship with an avoidant man, the more peaceful that your interactions at home feel to him, the more open emotionally he's likely to become. The moment that emotions feel chaotic, overwhelming, or unpredictable, it activates that sympathetic nervous system and danger starts screaming and he withdraws to try to assess where the danger is coming from. Where is the tiger? Is it over there in that bush? Is it over there behind that floral couch? Where is the tiger? His brain is scanning. And when an avoidant man retreats, it's not a conscious act of cruelty. It's a survival response deeply wired into his nervous system. The moment emotional closeness intensifies, his amygdala, that fear center, fires off the alarm signaling danger. His sympathetic nervous system surges into fight or flight mode. And since confrontation feels overwhelming, withdrawal becomes a smarter tactical escape. As stress hormones like cortisol flood through that system, his body tells him distance is the only way to regain control and decrease risk. So to justify pulling away, his prefrontal cortex starts rewriting the narrative, convincing him his partner is actually a problem. She's too needy. She won't give me space. I just need to breathe, he tells himself, reinforcing that belief that emotional intimacy itself is dangerous and suffocating. At the same time, his brain suppresses the oxytocin bonding that would get him closer to a partner. That's that bonding hormone that makes emotional connection feel amazing and connective. But instead, when it's blocked, it makes it feel unrewarding. Instead of processing what's happening to him, he numbs himself emotionally, dissociating, detaching from the relationship, and convincing himself he doesn't need love. He doesn't need anyone. In fact, he is better off alone. Now, the moment he distances himself, his brain decreases cortisol and releases dopamine to reward him for escaping, which will reinforce the cycle. Over time, this pattern strengthens, making withdrawal his default reaction to stress. Eventually, when he's been alone long enough to calm down, he starts to miss his partner, but instead of recognizing the damage his retreat caused, he expects to pick up right where you left off. If she's upset, he sees her reactions further proof that closeness is just too much trouble. This is why I needed space, he thinks, and the cycle repeats. Until he learns to regulate his nervous system, to override his impulse to flee, and to replace avoidance with conscious engagement, he will continue pushing away the very person who loves him the most. But when he starts to associate emotional connection with peace instead of stress and pressure, that's when he'll start to let you in. Now, this does take time. It takes patience and consistency because he's having to rewire his brain to correlate new data that he's never experienced before. And this is not you just letting him off the hook, per se, but creating an environment that doesn't trigger his avoidance so that he can start to see that you are trustworthy. Now, if you really want to understand why an avoidant man won't open up, you need to understand how his brain processes emotions differently from yours. An emotional man isn't calm most of the time. He might look calm on the outside. He might even tell you he's calm, that I am very calm. I am always stoic. But on the inside, his nervous system is always activated. His baseline state is hypervigilance. He is always scanning for potential threats in his environment, including and especially his relationships. He's on cortisol overload. His body is flooded with stress hormones pretty much 24/7 because he has almost no GABA, G-A-B-A, gamma-aminobutyric acid, an inhibitory neurotransmitter that actually shuts down GABA, and it stems from social emotional connection. His cortisol is unregulated. That's why he's so into stoicism, exercise, and self-improvement, is because the very chemical that should be buffering him is gone, and he has to actively, manually try to dump that stress constantly. And this is because he has a low oxytocin response. He struggles to bond emotionally the way that securely attached people do because cortisol and sympathetic nervous system activation, constant hypervigilance, blocks those oxytocin receptors so he can't get what he needs. Now, what does this mean in practice? His brain is wired for lone wolf survival. Everything is a battle to be fought and fought alone. Everything is a problem to be solved and solved alone. Everything is a threat to be avoided and avoided alone. The avoidant brain doesn't see the world objectively. It has a deep bias toward pessimism and assuming the worst of intentions. And it defaults to assuming that bad things will happen because that's what it has learned from past experiences. This is called a negative interpretation bias. The cycle here is that he expects the worst, so when good people come into his life, he assumes there's something horribly wrong with them and pulls away from them. And they see him withdrawing and assume he's disinterested, so he doesn't connect to healthier people. He will only connect to people who stumble in and promise all kinds of things or threaten and act badly. And he expects that, so he can predict them. So now he forms relationships with people who are guaranteed to let him down. And because he never opens up and connects to anybody, they're also guaranteed to wander away and assume he doesn't like them, which means he will then say, look, another person has walked away or betrayed me or just left me behind. Now, these behaviors are fueling an endless bias loop that he doesn't realize. Most avoidant men come to me and say, Adam, I get what you're trying to say, but I've never once met somebody who was calm and securely attached. You probably have, but they confused and frightened you, and you backed away. and you seemed disinterested to them, so they left. That's why you haven't experienced a person with secure attachment. You've probably met them and didn't know it, but you haven't experienced them ever. And you can't until you start resolving this, okay? Instead of using that information to justify how to interpret the relationship, seeking new data carefully and smartly is the way to opening this up. Now, to put it simply, if you say something neutral, he might assume it's negative. If you express emotions, he assumes you're overwhelming him or trying to control him and out of control. He's expecting you to let him down, and at worst, he's expecting you to betray him. This isn't a conscious choice, usually, although he might be aware of it. His brain is wired to expect people letting him down or betraying him, because that's what people have done his whole life. He's not wrong for recognizing the pattern. It's that his data set itself is so biased, he's guaranteed to see the same biased pattern. So his data set tells him he's right. The larger data set is what we're looking at. And this is going to be true even when there's no evidence that you're going to hurt him. His nervous system remembers past pain more strongly than it looks at present reality. This means that he struggles to trust good things. He sees emotional intimacy as something that will eventually go wrong, and he pulls away before he can get hurt, even when there's no actual threat. Now, your brain and his effectively are operating on completely different rules. It's almost like an Android phone versus an Apple phone. They operate very differently because he's in an altered survival state. It's still, you're both human, but the altered survival state is very different. Your emotional state, feelings create connection. Vulnerability builds trust. Talking through and processing emotions brings clarity and relief. But for his emotional system stuck in that chronic survival state, feelings create more stress. Vulnerability is doomed and risky. And talking through emotions just feels overwhelming and pointless and unproductive. So how does he process emotions? Because he has low oxytocin, he will process things tactically, unsentimentally, through a mechanical lens. He doesn't sit with emotions. He analyzes them, like in a laboratory, trying to force them to fit with logic. That's why when you try to have a deep emotional conversation, he doesn't react the way that you expect. You expect emotions and you express those emotions, and he searches for the problem. You tell him how much you love him. He wonders how much you want from him. You ask him what he's feeling. He panics because he doesn't have an answer or even know what he's supposed to say. It's not that he doesn't have feelings. It's that his emotions get buried under layers of stress, analysis, and skepticism, and then dissociated from so that he can move them away and get back to work and work 16 hours a day to relieve that stress instead. And because his nervous system is always on high alert, emotional conversations don't feel like a bonding experience to him. He doesn't get that relief, that release, or that connection. They feel like a battle he has to win or escape from. They feel like a risk he'll reveal too much and get turned against or left behind or rejected. This is why avoidant men often need more space before discussing any feelings they have, or they withdraw or go silent when they're overwhelmed. And the more pressure he feels to just open up, like in therapy, the more he retreats into silence. At his core, an ethically avoidant man doesn't want to lose you, but he's stuck in a cycle of self-sabotage that he doesn't see. So how can you tell when your avoidant man is feeling overwhelmed? And to ease off the pressure, well, here are some of his tells and how to interpret them. First, he goes quiet and he emotionally withdraws. Here's what this looks like. Short, clipped responses. Yeah, I'm fine. I don't know. Long delays in texting and calling back, from hours to full days. Rarely, but sometimes even weeks. Sudden disengagement in conversations and seems distracted or suddenly uninterested. Now, what's happening internally is that his brain is flooded with cortisol, the stress hormone, and his oxytocin receptors are blocked. His default self-protection mechanism is kicking in. Distance equals safety to him. If you're seeing this, don't do the following. Don't push him to explain what's wrong right now. His brain is in survival mode. Pushing harder will make him retreat further. Most women try to become comforting and have a big conversation about feelings. What are you feeling right now? Where are you at right now? What do you need? How can I help? This is the worst possible time to push in because his receptors for that are blocked. It will feel abrasive and painful, and he will begin retreating faster and harder, and maybe even get angry to take a snap at you, a bite, like a wounded animal who's backed into a corner, to get you to back off. And this is where a lot of irritability behaviors come from for avoidant men in this time. Do this instead. Give him space, but with a deadline. For example, I can see that you need some time and space right now. That's fine. Let's come back to this conversation at 7 o'clock tonight. Or let's come back to this in an hour. Is that enough time? We can come back to this tomorrow if you prefer. But I need an exact time for when we'll come back. Just let me know so that I'm not left waiting. His brain needs a predictable structure to feel safe. Predictability lowers his stress response by reducing uncertainty. The time constraints help him process without feeling trapped in emotional overload, but it also helps you reassure you that your needs will be addressed and you're not left hanging. It's one of the biggest problems for couples with an avoidant man is that long, indefinite gap when he chooses to walk away and their brain begins wondering, is he ever coming back? That's not fair to the partner either. Yes, he needs to get away to feel safe and breathe for a moment right now before he fixes that. But if you can do this, it gets so much better. His cortisol levels will drop, making him more receptive to emotional engagement. His oxytocin pathways, as he begins feeling calmer and at peace with you, can reactivate once he feels safe enough to reconnect and his sympathetic nervous system deactivates. He can engage more rationally because his prefrontal cortex has had time to come back online. Both of you can avoid unnecessary conflict, and he learns that emotional connection doesn't have to be overwhelming. In fact, when he got stressed out, you worked with him to solve it and released vasopressin, trust bonding, into his brain. Very key indicator right there. Now, the second sign that something's going wrong, he stops talking about future plans. What this can look like is a few things. He was talking about your future last week, but suddenly he's avoiding the topic. He dodges conversations about commitment or big decisions, and he keeps things vague and non-committal. Yeah, we'll see, maybe later. That'd be great. What's happening internally here is that his brain is scanning for risk, and future planning feels like a trap. He also is worried about promising you things he can't keep and then upsetting or hurting you down the road, or being trapped into a contract that he agreed to. His negative interpretation bias begins to kick in. What if this goes wrong like it did before and I can't deliver? He's pulling back to reestablish control over his environment. If this happens, do not panic and demand reassurance. Don't start pushing immediately on promises of the future. This will reinforce his belief that relationships equal unfair pressure and that he's being forced to sign a contract that is against his best interests or even dangerous. Instead, avoid emotional overreaction at first. His nervous system is scanning for threats. If you respond with anxiety and fear, it reinforces and confirms that belief that he needs to escape. Maintain warmth and normalcy. Keeping your interactions light and positive signals safety, which helps lower his cortisol response. This doesn't mean you can't have emotions, but again, warmth, normal, calm. Reassure through action, not words. Be predictable, stable behavior. This helps regulate his nervous system and allows him to re-engage naturally. And focus for a bit on your own fulfillment, engaging in your personal goals, hobbies, your friendships. This helps reframe the relationship as expansive for you rather than restrictive to you, reducing his fear of losing autonomy. This works because autonomy, individuality, reduces his brain's perception that the relationship is a smothering danger. Predictability lowers his stress response and prevents further withdrawal out of the relationship. His brain needs time to process safety before re-engaging emotionally with you. Now, if you do this, if you push too hard, his amygdala, the fear center, overactivates, triggering more withdrawal. But if you create emotional peace, calm, his cortisol levels plummet. Again, his oxytocin pathways can begin to open up. That makes connection feel safe again. His prefrontal cortex, logic, decision-making re-engages, allowing him to see the relationship as a stable, supportive part of his life. I don't want to lose this. This is amazing. Over time, he rewires his brain to associate commitment with security and freedom instead of pressure and control. Now, a third thing to watch for. His responses become guarded, tactical, and mechanical. what it looks like. Conversations will begin to feel cold, calculated, and overly logical. He stops using any emotional language, like saying, well, I feel like, and instead talks in facts and logic, numbers. You probably feel like you're talking to a lawyer, not a partner. You say something, well, actually, and it gets corrected, especially about the future, relationships, feelings, emotions. Corrected, vague, withdrawals. When did I say that? Here's what's happening. His analytical brain has fully taken over. He's detaching so he can begin assessing the risk of continuing the conversation. He's strategizing how to escape that interaction with the least emotional fallout. A big part of this is because, again, sympathetic nervous system goes up, oxytocin receptors block, they go to zero, it drains, he becomes very mechanical to protect himself. If this happens, do not try to break through by demanding deeper answers. Right now, he is not capable of deeper emotional processing. His logical brain has gone offline for a large portion. It looks a lot hyper-logical, but it's flowing through the stress pathways of danger and alertness instead. So it's hyper-logic filtered through that negative bias. This is not a good place for you to engage at all. It's not a good place for him to be or live, but it's not good for you to engage. Nothing good will be done here. Instead, one great tactic to use is to match his communication mode. If he's in logic mode, avoid pushing for that emotional depth. This prevents his stress response from escalating. Cortisol hijacks that rational thought ability. He's in hyper logic mode, but that doesn't make him rational. Instead, shift to neutral topics or practical topics. This keeps the interaction open without triggering his defenses. And that allows his nervous system to start calming down and regulating. Okay. Engage in some parallel activities instead. Pull away, and activities like walking together, going for a drive, doing a shared task together that creates a low pressure environment where he can feel calm without feeling forced into emotional exposure. This is a good opportunity for maybe even a little oxytocin bonding through physical touch, for example, holding hands while you walk, put your hand on his thigh while driving, light touches during a shared activity. If his brain is not flooded with cortisol, his sympathetic nervous system can come down and be more receptive to those bonding hormones. This works because avoidant men process emotions more easily in indirect settings. The low pressure interactions let his prefrontal cortex, that rational thinking area, stay engaged rather than being hijacked by his amygdala, the fear response. Physical movement can lower cortisol also and help ease emotional tension. So going for a calming walk can be great. Now, warning here, if you push for deeper conversations at these bad moments, his nervous system stays in fight or flight mode. That reinforces emotional withdrawal. If you allow low pressure reconnection moments, his cortisol levels go lower, making emotional engagement feel less risky. His logical brain stays online, which allows him to open up at a manageable pace rather than shutting down altogether. Over time, this rewires his brain to associate communication with safety and connection instead of pressure and risk. Now, fourth really big warning sign. He seems emotionally numb or indifferent. This can look like a couple things. He shows no reaction to things that would normally affect him. He appears disconnected, uncaring, or even cold. You start wondering if he even loves you at all. Now, what's happening internally is a few things. His cortisol levels are too high for emotional connection. His brain is defaulting to detachment or even dissociation as a survival response. Shut it all down. He's protecting himself from what he feels is certain hurt, betrayal, or overwhelm. If this is happening, do not take his emotional shutdown personally. It's a defensive mechanism, not a reflection of his feelings for you. His nuclear reactor on the inside has detected it's about to explode and is turning off. Lower the relational tension first. His nervous system is in dorsal vagal shutdown. That's pushing for emotions will only make him withdraw further because he has almost nowhere left to go. Engaging in low pressure bonding, like non-verbal communication, watching a show together, taking a drive, light physical touch, allows his parasympathetic nervous system to activate instead of the sympathetic. That eases his stress response. Reducing the emotional stakes is also crucial. Asking for smaller, neutral contributions, like making a simple decision together or helping with a task, can allow his prefrontal cortex, the logic center, to stay engaged without overwhelming him emotionally. Now, this works because oxytocin, the bonding hormone levels, are very, very low in avoidant men, and even lower, rock bottom, when he's emotionally numb. Gradual, tension-free connection brings that sympathetic nervous system down, opens up the oxytocin receptors, and allows them to slowly rebuild during times of peace. His amygdala right now is in protective mode, expecting emotional demand to be overwhelming. So reducing that emotional demand, the pressure, teaches his brain that safety is right there with you, that connection is actually very safe, and that you are a peaceful person. His cortisol levels are too high at this moment for emotional access. Calming that nervous system first makes the emotions accessible a little bit later. Now, if you demand emotional connection, yes, his brain will reinforce detachment as a protective measure over and over and over. And this is what usually drives avoidant men away. But if you create a calm, low-stakes connection, his nervous system relaxes. That makes emotional engagement feel so much safer. Over time, his brain rewires to associate relationships with safety rather than with emotional exhaustion, which breaks the numbness cycle. The fifth warning sign is that he misinterprets normal emotional expression as an attack. Here's what this looks like. You express your feelings gently and calmly, and he reacts like you're attacking him. He gets defensive, dismissive, or even irritated over minor issues. And he says things like, "Why are you making a big deal out of this? I don't see why this even matters. This is just drama." What's happening internally is that his negative interpretation bias is filtering everything through the lens of past betrayals and pessimism. His high stress makes him paranoid that everyone is out to get him, knowingly or unknowingly. And his fight or flight response makes him react with defensiveness and passive aggression. His negative interpretation bias is one of the biggest culprits here, honestly. This is that psychological defense mechanism where his brain automatically assumes the worst based on his past experiences. If he grew up in a household where emotions led to criticism, conflict, or punishment, his brain wired itself to perceive emotional conversations as inherently dangerous. This bias distorts reality by making neutral or even loving communication feel like an attack. His brain is not evaluating what you're saying. It's reacting to the emotional pattern it recognizes from the past. On a neurological level, when he hears a concern, his amygdala, the fear center, registers it as a threat before his logical brain even has a chance to process it. His prefrontal cortex, the rational problem-solving part of his brain, shuts down under stress, and his sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight mode, takes over. As a result, and I know you've experienced this one, his instant reaction is not about what you actually said. It's about protecting himself from what he thinks is happening. If his past relationships made him feel controlled, he assumes you're trying to control him. If he was criticized harshly as a child, he assumes you're criticizing him. If his emotions were never validated, he assumes you're dismissing him. This is why he reacts with defensiveness, irritation, or even withdrawal, even when you're just calmly expressing yourself. So here's what not to do. Don't argue with his perception. Instead of proving him wrong, focus on staying measured, calm, and clear in your communication. It's not about who's right and wrong. It's about how you both get through this moment. What to do instead? Try to convince him that you're not attacking him. Make it clear that emotional conversations are not threats. Lead with more neutral statements, like instead of, "You never listen to me," "Hey, I'd like to share something, and I don't need an immediate response. I just want you to hear me out." This signals low pressure engagement. This keeps his amygdala from hijacking the conversation before his logical brain can process it. There's another thing you can do called labeling the emotion, not the person. Avoid statements that imply blame or intent. Instead of, "You don't care how I feel," say, "When this happens, I really feel disconnected." Keeping statements focused on how you feel prevents the cortisol in his brain from spiking. That will prevent him from escalating into conflict and defensiveness. All of this can help prevent him from retreating because his brain doesn't signal danger. Another thing you can do is use measurable, concrete language. Instead of things like, "You always shut down," say, "Lately, I've noticed we don't talk as much when something's bothering me. Have you felt that too?" This might bypass his defensiveness by shifting to an observational problem-solving approach. His prefrontal cortex, the problem-solving center, needs clear, structured input to override the emotional defensiveness. You can also slow the conversation down. If he gets defensive, pause and de-escalate. Instead of continuing the conversation in the moment, say, "I don't want this to feel like pressure. I can bring it up another time if that helps. When would be a good time for you?" When stress is high, his sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive. Pausing this reduces stress hormones and allows rational thinking to return. You can also acknowledge his reaction without feeding it. If he says, "Why are you making a big deal out of this?" respond with, "I get why it might feel that way, but that's not my goal." This subtly reframes the interaction as cooperative rather than combative. This helps regulate his nervous system response by lowering cortisol and preventing his brain from escalating into full fight or flight mode. Here's why this works. Usually, his brain interprets emotional intensity as a threat. Neutral, low-pressure engagement, instead, keeps him receptive. His amygdala usually fires off before the logic kicks in. Framing conversation differently from the beginning helps prevent automatic defensiveness. Measured conversations activate the prefrontal cortex, improving his ability to engage without shutting down. Now, the outcome here is very clear. If you escalate with him, his brain doubles down on self-protection, which reinforces avoidance or hostility. Stress causes cortisol to spike, which triggers the central nervous system, and his body enters fight or flight mode. And then you're lost. But if you lower the emotional pressure instead, his nervous system gradually rewires to see emotional conversations as safe, not threatening. When cortisol is no longer dominating his system and it's not blocking oxytocin, and when vasopressin is available, his nervous system becomes more receptive to bonding as it's no longer in a state of high alert. Over time, his prefrontal cortex strengthens in emotional discussions, helping him stay present, engaged, and willing to open up. An emotional connection will stop feeling like a battle, which makes him feel more naturally responsive, connected, and secure in the relationship. Once he's able to receive the positive impact of oxytocin and vasopressin, his cortisol lowers, his serotonin increases, and this is where your relationship will truly begin to change. Now, you're watching this video because you want to learn how to help him truly open up. So far, we've talked about how to help him stop shutting down, which is great. But now let's talk about how to communicate with an avoidant man so he opens up fully and shows you his true feelings. Avoidant men don't respond to emotional pressure. We've talked about that. Instead, they respond to clarity, logic, and measurable communication. So what works? Clear, structured conversations, logical explanations for why emotional sharing benefits him, and no vague emotional language, just direct, practical communication. When he sees the value in a conversation and doesn't feel emotionally overwhelmed, he's far more likely to stay engaged instead of retreating. With that in mind, I've got 5 powerful communication shifts that work with avoidant men to open up and build a great connection. These are about framing communication in a way that makes sense to an avoidant man. Each example connects your emotional need to his logical way of thinking, removes pressure and gives him a clear path to success, and helps prevent the shutdown cycle. Let's go through these together so you see how to talk with him and get your needs met, by the way. This is a great process for you. First one, instead of, "We need to talk about our relationship," which sounds like death, say, "Hey, I'd love to check in with you once a week just to make sure we're both happy with how things are going. Just a quick 15-minute chat. Would that work for you?" This avoids vague, overwhelming statements that trigger his stress response. It gives a structured, low-pressure way to talk about your relationship, and it establishes a habit over time so he isn't caught completely off guard by emotional conversations. This also gives you a great place to start talking about your concerns. Most partners of avoidant men are constantly tiptoeing around, wondering when to bring things up. A weekly 15-minute meeting is a great pressure release valve for you. The second one, instead of things like, "Why don't you ever tell me how you feel?" say, "I know you process things differently than I do, and I want to respect that. But when something's on your mind, it would really help me if you could say something simple like, 'I just need some time to think. I'll check in later.' That way I won't misinterpret it and I can give you the space that you need." Here's why this works. It acknowledges his need for processing time while ensuring that he doesn't just vanish. It gives him a clear, simple action instead of forcing emotional conversation on the spot, and it prevents miscommunication spirals that make him withdraw even more. It also helps you feel at rest and peaceful and safe in the relationship. You do need healthy boundaries. It's not about catering forever to his need. It's about helping his need and your need work side by side. Here's a third one. Instead of, I wish you'd be more affectionate, say, I love when you do little things like hold my hand and when we go to shops together. It makes me feel really connected to you. What's something small I can do that also makes you feel appreciated too? This works because it highlights small, tangible actions rather than demanding more emotions, which he's not going to understand at first how to do. And it makes affection feel like a positive exchange, not a forced obligation. It also lets him know that you really like that thing, and then he can do more of it. One thing that avoidant men usually are very good at is learning what you like and remembering to do that, especially on a pattern, to care for you, especially if you help them understand how much of it you need. That also decreases his assumption that you need it constantly. You don't. Your needs are much smaller than he thinks. He just doesn't know what they are. The fourth rephrasing is, instead of things like, you always pull away when things get serious, say, I know that when things feel overwhelming, your instinct can be to step back. I don't want to pressure you, but it would also mean a lot to me if you could just let me know when you need some time to think or to go through those feelings so that I don't worry that I've done something wrong. This works because avoidant men have that rubber band effect. Closeness creates instability for them and it makes them feel uncomfortable, so they step back, which rips you apart at the moment when you were feeling closest of all. This hurts you and it confuses him. Giving him that understanding that he gets overwhelmed, he can breathe, but he needs to let you know, hey, it's feeling like a lot for me right now. Okay, you stop personalizing it, he can breathe. This actually allows him to come back to you very peacefully. He may not even step away after he says that. It may begin a better conversation. This acknowledges his natural avoidant response without shaming him either, gives him control over when he takes space, but removes the uncertainty for you and prevents you from ever feeling abandoned while still allowing him that time to decompress. Like I said, over time, this usually cuts down the need for those gaps. The fifth reframe, instead of saying, I feel like you don't care about me, say, I know that you show love differently than I do, and I don't expect you to be super emotional, but I do love hearing from you and knowing what's on your mind. Would you be open to just letting me know when something's bothering you, even if it's just a short message, so that I don't overthink things? This removes all accusatory language and it makes him defensive. Instead of being defensive, he feels like you're just noting a challenge and bringing it to him with a solution. It frames emotional sharing as a practical, low-effort habit rather than a big event, and it encourages tiny steps toward emotional openness in a way that he can handle. The goal here isn't to force vulnerability overnight or to point out his faults. It's to create a space where he feels comfortable and at peace, opening up without triggering his fear response. His nervous system stays calm like this, without needing that fear, without needing to protect. All of that, this allows him to still find a way for your needs to get met, which is crucial. I don't want anyone to feel like you have to cater to him and never get your needs met. Your needs must be met, but they must be done in a way that's peaceful and safe for both of you. I want to be clear. You can create a relationship where he opens up without shutting down. A relationship where you feel heard, understood, and emotionally connected without feeling like you have to chase, without pressure, and without exhausting yourself. And one where you are his place of peace. For real lasting change to happen, he needs to see and experience that there is another way to relate. He needs to break that negative bias, right? Now, for years, I've helped avoidant men who live that emotional experience firsthand. They build walls, they keep their emotions locked away, and they convince themselves that self-reliance is the only key to survival. But it's not. It's a slow path to disconnection, stress, and frustration. And I still see this same struggle today in the hundreds of men that I've helped break free from avoidance and step into secure, fulfilling relationships instead. So if you're stuck in the same cycle with your avoidant man, one where he's pushing away love, struggling with emotional connection, and you're feeling like your relationship won't ever really work, I'm here to tell you that your partner isn't stuck like this forever. They've learned these patterns from years of exposure to the wrong types of experiences. And what's learned can be unlearned. That's exactly what we do at my attachment immersion retreat. This year, it's going to be taking place in May in Colorado, and I would love for you to join me there. You won't sit through lectures or just take notes. There is no traditional therapy to endure. Instead, you'll actively train your nervous system to experience secure attachment in real time under my direct guidance. You will go through live practicum sessions, practicing the exact conversations, boundaries, and emotional skills that make relationships frictionless. You'll get immediate coaching, correction, and real-world application that sticks. Most couples spend years repeating the same painful cycles, hoping that things will change. But we condense all of that wasted time into one high-impact period, giving you practical tools that will work from day one. But there are only a few spaces left for the May retreat at the Grand Hyatt in Vail, Colorado, so I invite you to reach out to my team today to reserve your spot. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. I'm Adam Lane Smith, the attachment specialist. If this information has been helpful, please make sure you like, share, and comment. And I would love for you to share this video with a friend who might be struggling to relate to their own avoidant partner. Invite them to come in and comment any questions that they might have. I also have live streams every Tuesday and every Wednesday at 11 a.m. U.S. Central Time, where I'll be answering your questions about these challenges and your relationships. Come join me.